My name is Mark Jaffe. I'm with the Reason Foundation, and we're here today to talk about implementing XBRL for local government CAFRs. The problem that we're trying to address here is the fact that tens of thousands of governments nationally, including at least 1,000 governments in Florida, produce annual financial reports in PDF format. We normally think of those as CAFRs, Comprehensive Annual Financial Reports. They are generally produced in PDF format, and as a result, it's very difficult for researchers and investment analysts to understand and get their hands around all the information that these valuable documents include. In the slide that I'm showing right now, you can see, for example, the City of St. Petersburg's other post-employment benefits footnote, and there's a lot of valuable information here, but it's very difficult to get some of this data, like, for example, the number of participants and the amount that was spent into a database. By converting to XBRL, we would be able to create a standardized database of government financial statistics based on audited financial reports like the one that you just saw a link from. And this would provide a lot of benefits, including making the municipal bond market more efficient and providing greater transparency for taxpayers, researchers, and other stakeholders in the government finance process. So the first step, which is going to happen here in Florida, is migrating these PDF disclosures into a machine-readable format known as XBRL. And today we've invited several companies that provide technical solutions that could potentially help us with this transition. So with that, I'd like to turn over to Ann Fritz, who is the Chief Financial Officer of the City of St. Petersburg, who's been really a leader in this movement of converting to machine-readable disclosure.
Good morning and welcome to St. Petersburg. As we say, the challenge here, the challenge has been instrumental. I have been a finance director now for almost 30 years, and we've evolved from paper and WordStar, and then we brought in Lotus, and then we've seen this evolution, and we thought we were doing really well when we went to PDF. So now we see the challenge now is to take PDFs to the next area. And why we want to do this is we find that our financial information from a public perspective can be very difficult to find and very difficult to read. In addition, we have a duty not to the public, but also to our creditors on as we issue a large amount of publicly traded debt, is to make sure that those people who are investing in our community have the reliable financial information and comparability that they can do to differentiate the City of St. Petersburg from the City of Tampa, the City of Orlando, or throughout the United States. So in order to achieve that, we need to take our financial statement data to the next level. And I welcome everybody here today that are involved in this movement to take this data up to the next level.
So now I'm going to introduce Rachel Carpenter, CEO of Intrinio. Intrinio has been very active in getting Florida to move forward with this. And without further ado, turn over to Rachel.
Right, if you want to get anything done fast, you ask an entrepreneur, right? So huge testament to Shannon and Mark for all the work they've done over the past 6 years, you said,
yes,
to make a ton of progress. I grew frustrated watching the federal government struggle for over a decade to make progress in this area, and I didn't want to wait any longer because that's not my nature. So we decided to make an example out of Florida, and I'm hoping that we can make really good progress here and that Florida can be an example for other states. I think it's better to make progress here than it is to wait another decade for the federal government to get it together. So that's what we did, and I'm so excited to see everybody in the room today. I'm the CEO of a company called Intrinio, which is local here in St. Petersburg. Our office is actually just 2 blocks down the road. And we are an XBRL member. We are huge fans of XBRL. We've been advocating as much as we can for the expansion of XBRL. We have a technology that normalizes XBRL data using machine learning, maps it to standardized tag set, and then builds APIs and smart data around it to be distributed to both analysts and developers. So what we're excited about here is how much farther this can expand just beyond helping the state of Florida and lowering the cost of capital and increasing infrastructure and lowering taxes. There's obvious benefits there. But where this solution becomes extremely powerful is not just on the construction side, which is what we're here to talk about today, but it's on the consumption side, which is where Intrinio plays. So we'll come into play longer down the road once we make progress here and get things filed in this way, which is where, when we're able to get this data into the hands of companies like Intrinio, we can build APIs around it. We get that data then into the hands of developers. And when you make this data structured and available to programmers, the amounts of apps and analytics they can build on top of it are going to take us to the next level. So that's what we're excited to help out with, and we're looking forward to seeing it happen.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
So we have 7 presentations that will last about 15 minutes each. So we'll start with Jignesh from ConvergeSolve.
Good morning, everyone. I would like to thank Mark and colleague for inviting us and giving us this opportunity to present our XBRL solution. But before we get into the demo, I want to spend a few minutes to brief about Converge solution and our XBRL capabilities. And then we can go into the demo to the kind of things that we have done before. So basically, Converge solution is a software solution provider working mainly for financial services company, even in financial services specifically for the family office, hedge fund, and investment management companies. What sets us apart is the know-how of the industry, how we leverage that with our software development pedigree to provide outstanding solutions for our clients. I think that's the main thing. What I guess you guys are all interested in the XBRL capability, which is we have done a lot of work on XBRL, so we can go into that now. So we have done a lot of work around regulators, banks, insurance companies, and stock exchanges. And our solutions mainly range from all the way consulting to training and everything in between. So we have a couple of solutions, but what I'm going to talk about today is what we call Convert to XBRL Instance Creator. What is that is basically a smart Excel-based solution that allows you to leverage your Excel skills. So you don't need, as an end user, I think one of the biggest apprehension to XBRL is the know-how, the intricacies of it, and so on and so forth. So what this solution allows is to use your Excel every day, that you are very familiar with, and then take care of all the intricacies behind the scene to convert to XBRL. And then obviously it has a lot of validations and error handling baked into it. That it can be used, and we'll see it in a second, for generating the XBRL as well as iXBRL document. It is being used at a number of places around the world. For example, in India, it is being used by the largest stock exchange, Bombay Stock Exchange, National Stock Exchange, and Metropolitan Stock Exchange. We worked with the Ministry of Corporate Affairs as well for the regulatory filing, as well as creating APIs for Reserve Bank of India, which is the equivalent of Federal Reserve here. And then we have done work in Mauritius, the UK, and then finally built a proof of concept, which we'll get into momentarily, around CAFR, that you'll be able to see it. So I think this is always the question, why? What's the value add? And as I said, the biggest one is you don't need to know about XBRL. You can go into it without knowing XBRL and focus on what you're good at, like putting your numbers and all the other things, and no worries about the XBRL itself. It's an Excel and Word-based solution. It is compliant with many regulatory systems. For example, EDGAR, SEC it's compliant with. And more importantly, it is adaptable, so it can grow. For example, with the CAFR XBRL standard that we are all trying to come up with, so it can grow into that and used for that. And finally, last but not the least, it is battle tested. It is already being used by many places around the world, so it's been used quite a bit. All right, so without further ado, I want to get into the demo. All right, so what you see here is we have created an Excel, which is pretty much the markup of what you typically do with the CAFR report. So we have a tab for each of these sections, like statement of net position, statement of activities, and so on and so forth. This is where you put your numbers. So for example, if I have, you're working off of Excel, and this is the section that you have. So you can just copy it from here and paste it right here. and it gets plugged in right there. One of the other things that comes to your mind is, okay, you want to add, this is good, numbers are all good, but what about the textual information? So there are two ways we allow to do the textual information. You can put a note at each of the element levels. So you have, for example, cash and cash equivalents of governmental activities. And let's say you want to put a note that this includes certificate of deposit, for example. And you can save a footnote to it. And when you come back to it, it is saved. So essentially what it is going to do is once it generates the XBRL, it's going to put that footnote right there. Similarly, the other type of note that you want to put in is, you have more textual information. For example, you're working off of your Word document here, and then you want to put some note in there. So you just kind of copy and paste it here and save it, and it's going to be there. What it's going to do is, again, generating the IXBRL, this notes will be part of it. Again, it's going to be dependent on the taxonomy that are going to be coming up, but that's, you'll be able to take care of the textual presentation of your information as well. All right, now one of the other questions that comes that, okay, this is great, but what if, I fat fingered and this number got deleted? What do I do? So we have a business validation, rules validation baked into it. I click on the validate and it says some errors have come up. I show the error, yes, it says, which cell, and more importantly, what is the error? This is a mandatory field. I can go to that cell and then correct the error. And then I validate it again, and it says, it validated successfully. So, there are validations and error handling also built into it. And once you are all set, so, we put in the, input the information, we did the validation, we did, error handling, we put the footnotes and things like that. Now we're ready to generate the IXBRL. It does it with a click of a button. Validate all sheets basically is going to validate all the sheets to make sure it is compliant. And then generate IXBRL button, when I click on that, it's going to generate the IXBRL. And what it's going to do is going to go sheet by sheet and generate the IXBRL, and then allow you to save it to whichever location you want to save it under. And once you save it, it's going to you open that with the HTML browser. And it's going to be able to show that in a second. All right, here you go. So you can save it whichever location that you want. I have already saved it, so I'm going to just show you that. So this is the XBRL that it has created. And if you click on a specific tag, it's going to show the detail of that tag. And then you can highlight all the tags, and it's going to, you'll be able to see all the information. So this is IXBRL. You can see it. Now, one last piece that I want to show you is on the RL, which is kind of, Edgar compliant. So, I've loaded the same file here, and then, it can get opened into its browser where you have all your financial statements showing up, statement of net position, statement of governmental fund balance sheet, and so on and so forth. So this is pretty much, as you can see, it's pretty straightforward to input the information, generate the IXBRL at the click of a button. And that's pretty much, I think, what I wanted to show you today. I don't know if Mark has planned any Q&A, but I'm going to be around. So if anyone has any question or something, I'll be happy to talk to you one-on-one, Oren.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you for this opportunity. XBRL US. I really appreciate being here. I'm Joe Stimick. I'm the CEO of Thales Consulting. And all we do is financial reporting for local governments. So cities, counties, school districts, water districts, and mostly annual reporting. So the CAFR, if the annual report isn't quite up to CAFR standard, then it's just an annual report. We do some state reporting in both Florida and California. And because of that focus on government annual financial reporting, we have no XBRL experience. So I need to tell you a little story of how somebody that knows nothing about XBRL is here. After House Bill 1073 passed, one of our long-term clients, the City of St. Petersburg, put me in touch with Mark. They're like, they use our product to create their CAFR. They told me, you know, this is a natural extension of your software. I completely agree. And so then joined XBRLS and part of the working group. So that's how somebody that knows nothing about XBRL is here giving you a talk today. All right, so just a quick outline, just intro on the company. I'm going to go through some screenshots of the software, explain kind of how we pull this together and the problems we're solving, and then you can kind of see how we could build in XBRL assessment and integration. I founded the company in August 2002. I have kind of one interesting thing about me is after I got my accounting degree, I then promptly went and got a master's in analytic philosophy. And so then after that, I didn't get a job, and so I went back to accounting. But I need to say this XBRL problem is intellectually interesting to me, right? I studied logics for 2 years, like layering meaning onto this stuff. This is totally cool. So I'm very interested in this problem. Thales Consulting is a California corporation. I started it when I was in California, so you usually just incorporate where you live. Then I moved to Cleveland, Ohio. Most of our clients are still in California, the majority of them, so I still try and pay taxes there. And then we have a support team in Marquette, Michigan. CAFR Online is the primary product. We ran our first clients in 2005. The real incentive for this was GASB 34 passed, and compiling the CAFR became way more difficult to do in Excel and Word in the Microsoft Office environment. So I wanted to create kind of a single solution to produce that document, and in fact, that's what our software does. What gets exported out of our software is a single PDF or Word file, and so then the design now is to layer in XBRL taxonomy on top of that. Just our user statistics, we have local government CAFR clients in 19 states and growing. And that's CAFR and then annual reports. And then we also do a bunch of state reporting. A lot of them are in California, but we also have state reports, the AFRs here in Florida. So we have over a dozen clients here in Florida. About half of them do the AFR also, because here the CAFR needs to be your basis for the AFR. And so once House Bill 1073 passed, this hit our radar. I heard about XBRL, like everyone was saying, 10 years ago, and then it kind of dropped off, but now it's back on the radar. Okay, so what is CAFR Online? At the core, we're solving a publishing problem. Typical local government will have 50 to 200 financial statements in their one annual financial report. This is a problem that the private sector doesn't have, right? General Electric, they got 3 of them, right? And then they provide a little detail. So, local governments have a publishing problem that the businesses don't. So you can imagine when you're doing a financial report, you want to format it in Excel. You want subtotals, so you want to do that in Excel. But then you can't do page numbering, note disclosures, all of that table contents in Excel. So you put it into Word. So that's really the core problem we're solving with CAFR Online. We're giving you a substitute for Microsoft Office to publish out of. So XBRL, adding an XBRL tagging is a natural extension of that. All right. One thing, just to quickly, it was designed to use by local governments. So there's lots of products out there for audit firms, things like that. And we, like I emphasized, we have the entire CAFR in there. It's not just financials, things like that. We're hosted software as a service. It allowed us to provide a high level of service and streamline the process, minimize training. And then the compilation issues I already went to on the bottom, I mentioned earlier. So how do we do this? we bring in the financial information from the general ledger system. We work with we're GL independent, so St. Pizza, Oracle. We work with pretty much everybody. It's the same information you're already putting into your CAFR using Excel and Word. That's what we bring into our software. Then we use the chart of accounts to map to the financials. It's a point-and-click user interface. And so between those two things, we have a lot of opportunities. Probably just from our data structure alone, we already can do some of the XBRL tagging once the taxonomy gets developed, just in some of our database structures. Then you have the note disclosures. Those are more accessible anytime. And then out of the website comes a single PDF or Microsoft Word document, and eventually something that's House Bill 1073 compliant. So this is what the software looks like. This is the main working menu. You'll notice that there's kind of two-tone here. There's darker gray and lighter gray. Darker gray is going to be a financial report, and that's what I'm going to show you first. A lighter gray will be like the documenter, like stuff you would do in Microsoft Word. In how am I doing on time? 8. Okay. So once you click on a financial statement, this is kind of the working grid. Everything related to a financial statement is accessible from here. You can hit a statement preview, because we're publishing out of this, if you want to see stuff with subtotals, things like that. Again, the main working grid here, I want to emphasize that the entire CAFR is here, right? You got the introduction, RSI, notes, the entire thing's in there. We've got analytics, so you can do variances, you can look at last year, you can export all the detail from this page related to the governmental balance sheets, including the combining statements. And then this is obviously, you do the groupings by clicking on the descriptions, and if you want to see drill down for the number, you click on the number. So then this is that number with the detail. We're using a client's chart of accounts. There's no preset template here. We completely build it up from a client's chart of accounts. And it's a working trial balance. You can post adjustments to this and build up. Sometimes there's adjustments required just for financial reporting purposes that can be tracked in here. You'll see this export button in a couple of places that will take whatever's on the screen and dump it in Excel if you need to work with it. I mean, these can be, hundreds of rows long, and sometimes you need to do further analysis. Sorry, you can see an add adjustment. That would bring you over into the adjustment screen. I just want to bring up that this is a working trial balance. You can post adjustments to this. We're managing multiple bases here, so your budget basis, your actuals, your original budget, your final budget, the government-wide, your posting adjustments here. These are kind of little folders, so these would be individual adjustments. You can upload backup. You can put in descriptions. But we're also publishing out of here, right? So it's not just building this up. This is what you publish out of here. Right now it's a PDF and Microsoft Word document. One thing I forgot to show you, not coded. So anything that's new, when you bring in your trial balance, it comes in as a not coded. So it comes up as a to-do on the financial statements. It's obvious. And when you go to PDF, it's there too. We got a lot of analytics. So now we're going back to the main screen. I'm going to show you the document editor portion. So this will be one of the lighter gray areas. This is where you build up your note disclosures, things like that. This is a good example of where some XBRL tagging could come into play. And it looks kind of crappy here because you got blue numbers, you got red numbers, you got black numbers, but it's all for a reason. So this is basically, again, all web-based, all online. The red numbers are simply formulas, and the blue numbers are pulling from the financial statements. So you post an adjustment, it's going to ripple through. If you clicked on this right here, this would bring you over into the spreadsheet editor. So this is where it's actually Excel-like. So I've highlighted this cell, and you can see some. So you still have Excel-like formatting functionality, things like that. And again, we're publishing out of here, right? So this is a PDF export of that. Just to kind of summarize, I feel like we have a good starting point. Well, first of all, we're exporting an entire document. Once there's a taxonomy in place, we just got to figure out how to apply that. We probably need to change our format to an HTML. Because everything is already in a relational database, we probably, just from the structure of how we structured it, can add some tags that way without even, we can just hard code that for the most part. The general fund, we're all, just from our data structure, we're going to know what the general fund consists of at any point. So then the challenge will kind of be the UI, like how do we use our existing screens to build in convenient tagging for the ones that we couldn't automate, or even the ones that are automated so it's transparent. And our real approach is to be Florida first, right? Our users expect something by 2022, so we got to deliver it. So that's it.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm Pramod. I head product design at DataTrax. So thanks to Mark, Shannon, and XBRL US for getting this working group up and running. We are very much excited to be part of this. Little bit about DataTrax. So we at DataTrax assist the filing, the enterprises in preparing and submitting their regulatory reports to different regulators across different jurisdictions. So we have the global operations in US, UK, India, and Singapore, and we have launched the software recently for South Africa. The South Africa went live by July 2018 with XBRL. And yes, and we have 13 years track record in XBRL preparation with 500 plus employees, and we have, on an average, we do 12,000 prepare 12,000 XBRL filings a year, majority of which is in iXBRL format, and different iXBRL variants, like we have XBRL, you have the inline and the data point model for European Union filings for banks and insurance companies. That has a lot of data, huge volume of data with templates. And we are ranked among top 3 in public league tables for the consistent 20 quarters. And yes, we are certified by XBRL International for generating a valid XBRL output. So so iXBRL is not something new to the world. It's been in existence since 2010, and we are one among the early entrants in the iXBRL when the UK HMRC mandated for the tax filings in UK. So far till date, we have produced close to 100,000 plus reports and in iXBRL format alone. In terms of the presence, we have the operations in UK, Ireland, now we have launched the iXBRL capability in US and South Africa. And we are also actively engaged in the working group and European Union regulation for the listed companies to file in inline format with ESMA. So we have, what we have done is we have, thanks for Mark to give us this pilot opportunity, first of all. We have taken this, the CAFR for St. Petersburg. We have incorporated that in our Rainbow application. So this is the application which we use for the US, UK, for the inline XBRL format for across different geographies. So we have taken, we have got the input in the application. We have incorporated the CAFR taxonomy. We have just run a quick pilot. So on the right hand side, you see the taxonomy in the tree structure. On the left hand side, you have the content. So the best part about the application is that you can bring the content, you can retain the presentation layer of the CAFR. They can the filers can have their own presentation structure, and you can embed the XBRL taxonomy on the document. So they don't have the output is not rigid. The output is flexible according to the presentation structure of the filer. So that's how we have done that, and and so this is how it works. So normally we allow the filers to create the entities. So it can have it works both for intermediaries as well as the end filers. So we allow them to create entities, users, and then they can restrict the access in our application at the user at the section level. They can separate the sections. They can split the document into as many sections as they would want. And so that's on this setup. And on the preparation side, you can create a document for each filing phase. You can populate the content at multiple levels, like you can either upload the Word document or Excel document, or you can link the data from your underlying system or simple Excel spreadsheet or the legacy system, get the data into the application. Not just the numeric data, also the non-numeric facts like date and the names. And of course, you can tag the XBRL elements on the top of the content layer. And as part of the output, so the various validation rules, the best part is the validation engine itself is in the modular approach. So you can have as many validations as built in the application. And then you can, once you're done with the rules, validations, you can generate the XBRL for submission. And of course, you can also generate the Excel report for reviewing the element selection. So this is about features of the application. So it's a cloud. Accessing from anywhere is not an issue. You can regulate the data access at the entity level and at the section level within the entity. So the collaboration, you can have multiple users on the job working at the same time. So the automatic linking, as I said earlier, you can link the numeric facts, also the non-numeric facts into the application. And of course the roll forward. So as you work on the document, once you set the XBRL in the application, you can roll forward the XBRL elements from the previous filing reporting cycle to the current one. So that saves a lot of time in the XBRL tagging. And so you have the audit trail and preventive validation. And yes, of course, outputs in multiple formats, the XBRL, the inline XBRL, or the data point model, or so the PDF, the Excel. So we have the output the capability to generate the output in multiple formats. And we added to the necessary data security standards like ISO, and so we get the application run through the rigorous vulnerability testing. And of course, the application itself is hosted within the US for the US market. So this is why data tracks. So we implement the first thing is the quick implementation. So we since the application itself is separated into a recurring part, which is the tagging layer, and before that you have the implementation layer. So the implementation time is pretty much quick, and it saves a lot of time and cost. And we have now have the third generation of application, which is very user friendly, and in terms of performance, it is way better than the previous one by leaps and bounds. And yes, we have the same platform we use in terms of reusability. We have the same platform across different jurisdictions. All that we need is to just plug out the existing taxonomy and swap the new one, and you're good to go, and just work on the output framework. It will be ready for the new market. And it is scalable, and so as the onboarding new filers and the volume of data, the application is scalable, and it is collaborative. And we have the global presence. We have the maximum number of XBRL footprints across the world, and we are ranked high on the quality charts. So thank you.
Well, thank you everyone for coming today. Good morning. My name is Srini Murthy. I'm the Vice President and co-founder of Easy XBRL Solutions. And we primarily provide products and services around the space of compliance reporting based on XBRL and other reporting standards, as well as the ability to provide solutions that allow the consumers of that data to make insightful decisions and look at the data in multiple perspectives. So thank you everyone, and thank you Ms. Fritz for coming and joining us today. And we appreciate Mark and Shannon's leadership in this effort. So today basically what we'll be doing is talking a little bit about my company, but more about what we feel this legislation that's been passed by the Florida House, 1073, how it could potentially benefit all stakeholders. So that's the objective here. There you go. So today's presenters are going to be myself. I'm going to talk just a few minutes and pass it on to my teammate, Yossi Newman. And I'll let Yossi speak about his background a little bit more. But in terms of my own background, it's an interesting thing in the sense that I have an accounting degree. I almost became what is known as a chartered accountant in India. And then at that point in time, I decided, no, I'd probably do something on computer science. So I'm the dangerous accountant who knows very little about accounting going back 30 years. But I spent a lot of time in computer science and software design, architecture, etc. So that's kind of my perspective is we built a product, we built platforms around using various types of data and how best they can contribute to a variety of communities that are reporting to regulators and other organizations that consume that data in a kind of a regular, frequent manner. A little bit about my company. We were formed in 2009. We are based out of Manassas, Virginia, just outside of DC. Essentially what we do is we provide, like I mentioned, products and services. The focus today in terms of what we do is we cater to both sides of the equation in the sense that we deliver products and services that facilitate the creation of the data, but at the same time also the consumption of that data. So our perspective today in this presentation between myself and Yossi is to focus more around the learnings that we've had with that experience of going back about 9 years and how that benefits potentially going forward any initiative that Florida and other states in the country go embark on. In terms of our own footprint, we are based in multiple countries. We're headquartered in the US, but we have multiple subsidiaries across the world, India, UK, South Africa, etc. And we have, like I said, several products. I won't go too deep into those, but the unique thing that we bring to one of our platforms, which Rachel mentioned in her product also, which is related to being able to provide a platform that allows other software engineers and application developers to consume that data. So one of our platforms is a tool that leverages multiple patented technologies that we have around natural language processing. So it's a combination, as someone quoted in the blog post from the Data Coalition, we bring what's known as the double-barreled approach to data consumption because we look at both structured and unstructured data and being able to combine the two to give you a perspective. So we have essentially the ability to go, even today, to do some of the analytics that you need, but we believe XBRL provides the greatest bang for the buck in terms of real structured data and real value that it can bring. I'd like to hand over to Yossi now. And
absolutely. Thank you, Srini. First of all, I'll just take a little bit more of our valuable time to repeat the thank you to Mark, to Anne, to Rachel. Everyone here has talked about how excited they are to finally be here and at this point, and I suspect, although I don't want to grab the honor for myself, I may be potentially the most excited one in the room. This event, this undertaking really brings together a few, I hate to sound geeky, but a few passions of mine. The accounting side, the data consumption analytics side, and governmental and not-for-profit accounting. Background-wise, I have been teaching governmental and not-for-profit accounting up in a university in New York for about the last 6 years. For the last 16 years, in a number of roles, first at Deloitte, leading their national office XBRL initiative at the time of the SEC mandate, and then as a consultant who's done work around the world with the IFRS taxonomy, down with the Brazilian government around the municipal to treasury reporting implementation, and then as the audit committee chair of a mid-sized not-for-profit. We provide mental health services in the New York area. We are the recipients of state and local grants there, and so we do reporting there as well. This is something that is really a sweet spot for me that I've got a lot of passion for. And so for the next 5 or 6 minutes, what I intend to do is a pitch, not about a particular tool, and not even really about the data aspect of it, although that's very much in my mind, but to the folks in the trenches, so to Anne and to the folks in your department, to the people who will be seeing this around Florida and more broadly in municipalities who spend their days and nights on this work and trying to give you some perspective that might broaden the way you think about where this ultimately goes and really give this a little bit more momentum. So with that in mind, a little quote out of the legislation. It's the intent of the legislature to create the Florida Open Financial Statement System, an interactive repository for governmental financial statements. As we've heard in the room, this would sound like, hey, this is all about enhanced transparency, making data more available, more usable. So is that what we're here for? And I would answer that absolutely yes, that is what we're here for. However, what I would say is that this undertaking can be about a whole lot more. Disclosure modernization for municipalities can be far more than just better data to the folks downstream. So with that in mind, and as the slide kind of cycles through its little animations, forgive me for if it doesn't look quite perfect. From my perspective, if we accomplish better data, yes, we've accomplished a lot. As Rachel mentioned, unleash the developers on the data, see where that goes. I'm going to come back to that. But there's another way of looking at this as well. We can look at this as a more holistic process by which we revisit the way in which CAFRs are prepared, the whole picture of what municipalities report and who they report it to. And let's give that a little bit of thought and see where that leads us. So again, is this about better data to data consumers? Yes, absolutely. However, let's start thinking about how a better process, right, and better methods around what we do will ultimately lead to data that's far more useful and far deeper and broader than what's available today. How do we get there? What are we embarking on? We're looking to take a standards-based approach, right? A standards-based approach to what? To disclosure modernization. Now, again, in a nutshell, what this is again, I liked what you said, Rachel, before about unleashing the developers. But what I would say at this point, and I'll expound on later in the discussion, is it's not just about unleashing the developers on the data. It's unleashing the developers on the entire process, right? The rules that we use in terms of validating our data, the way we reconcile our data, the way we compile our data. And so looking at it that way, bringing all of that, the reporting system itself, into an open structured data format is something that has potential beyond just consumption. So with that in mind, when we talk about an open standard for disclosure, that brings us right to XBRL. If you look around the globe at XBRL implementations, XBRL has made its mark by bringing together flexibility and comparability, by bringing together opening of a reporting process and framework to developers and to technology, and to leveraging technology and modernization, not just for data consumption, but also for the production and the entire supply chain of that data. So as we think about what we're embarking on now, I would draw a contrast here. An XBRL implementation that we embark on can take what I'd call current state approach, or we could take a future state approach. Now, these are my own words, but the way I would look at it is the following. A current state approach takes what we do today and simply says, let's move the data we produce into a machine readable format. The idea is to make the data more accurate, more usable. The beneficiaries are all downstream for the most part. It's the regulators, it's the state that you report to, it might be the MSRB, the investing community, all very important, the academics, the researchers. I count myself among the academics and researchers. So yes, thank you if we get that done. It's quite an accomplishment. However, there's another way we might look at it, a much more holistic way. And here what we're looking at is to stop and pause and consider, what is it that we're reporting, right? How is that data compiled? Who is it reported to? How is it used? And our objective here is to go through a process by which we identify pain points, identify redundancy, and look for where we can improve on all of those. The beneficiaries here are first and foremost the folks in the trenches, right? The people who are producing the data, right? Now, is that a different focus than what we've been hearing in the room until now? I would say not. You know, on the plane, on the way over here, and anyone who's been on a plane since 1970 has heard the announcement where, you know, if the oxygen masks drop, make sure you put on yours first before you try to assist others. Now, that's not because we're in the me generation or greed is good or worry about myself and, you know, to the exclusion of everyone else. It's no. If you are in a position of strength, if you've got a good place to work off of, everyone else around you is going to benefit. And so the primary beneficiary, be selfish. Look at yourself. Look at how your process can improve, because ultimately that's going to open the doors to far deeper, broader data for the folks who are getting the information from you. Again, keeping time in mind, let me move it a little bit further. Yes, can we take a current state approach, take the CAFR today, move it over with tags so that the developers can get at it? Will there be a benefit? Yes, but when you go down this way, typically the benefit to the folks in the trenches is minimal. Yes, you'll be able to benchmark yourself against someone else. You know, there was, I think the largest municipal fraud in the US was up in Dixon, Ohio, I think, or Dixon, Illinois. I'm sorry, yeah, I didn't mean to take the credit away from the folks up in Illinois. One of the interesting things about that is how a mayor in a neighboring city had sent an email or a letter to the mayor of Dixon saying, hey, something's wrong with your financials. I'm looking at mine, I'm looking at yours, we're pretty much parallel, and it just doesn't add up. And so yes, current state, can you and benefit from better data by being able to see and do benchmarking? Sure, but that's about the limit of it. A future state approach is focused on a better process. It's focused on the pain points that make your days long and your nights even longer. And that's what I think we don't want to lose sight of here. And so with that in mind, here for folks who like it verbally better, you know, tagging the text blocks, right? The same thing, just in a little bit more organized format if anyone, you know, seeing the recording wants to read that. Here's the way I would lay out the current process. The current process is you've got manual, overlapping requirements. You've got compilation. When you're done with that, you compile again. When you're done with that, you compile again. And then, as I like to say, in each case, you have compilation, then you have validation, then you have reconciliation, and then you need a vacation, right? And so, you know, the point is that we've got these processes, the CAFR, the AFR, the continuing disclosure requirements to EMA. And in each case, the folks, you know, I think it was Joe mentioned how in his tool he's got built-in validation. But you know what? The validation at DFS, or the perspective that the Auditor General is going to take when they receive that document and start combing through it. What Logar does when it receives your document, what MSRB or EMA spits back at you. Everyone's got their own validation, their own perspective on the world. Just this week, I was looking at a transmittal form for a county someplace north of Florida on the East Coast. Don't want to get too specifics. And this was an elaborate spreadsheet for submission of comparative report to their state, something like the AFR. And in that document, I saw 81 pieces of data that were flagged as requiring explanation. The provider must, underline, bold, provide explanations for these amounts. Now, this was in a spreadsheet. There were formulas, validation in a hidden tab that you'd have to actually kind of look through. There was a little formula that said, look at a cell, see if the word town appears. If the word town appears in that cell, then give this message. Now, beyond that, there were another 6 error messages. According to state law, cities and counties must operate a buildings inspection function. Please report that data because we don't see it. There was another thing there saying on page 52 of your CAFR, you reported $71 million in pension liabilities for your Department of Education. Just about done, Mark, we're right there. For your Department of Education, please reclassify that on your comparative report on your AFR from general government to your education function. And so these validations of the state were buried in a spreadsheet somewhere. Now just imagine if you take an easy XBRL and a CAFR Online, a Workiva, the rest of the folks here, and if we were to put not just the data into a machine-readable format, but the entire reporting process. The reporting requirements they're communicated in a taxonomy. The validation gets captured in machine-readable formulas. That can then get pushed out to the vendors in this room. Imagine how much more we get when we unleash those vendors, not just on the data, but on the reporting requirements. And so, keeping that in mind, I know that this may just look near and dear to me. It may look more complicated to you, but the idea here is, yes, the municipal systems, they will be yours. You own them, you love them, you create them the way you want to. However, if we can move to XBRL, to an open standard for not just the data at the very end, but if we were to move that chart of accounts over and then do the validation there, we'll all be in a much better place. And that's that. Hopefully that will inspire some, and thank you all for being here. I look forward to dealing with you all.
Very good. Thanks very much for setting this up. Thanks everyone for being here. My name is Charlie Harris. I'm with Certain, and I will be very quick. We'll just get right into it. I'm going to talk a very brief introduction, one slide talking about, just to give a little background, who our company is, who I am. Then we're going to talk about approaches to XBRL based on our experience, to talk about some different ways that the cities, municipalities, and counties can approach doing XBRL. Talk about XBRL applied to narrative reporting, because a CAFR is indeed a narrative report. Even though it has numbers, there's numbers and narrative mixed. So we'll talk a little bit about that. and then a little bit overview of one of these approaches, which we call the integrated approach, and kind of talk a little bit about some of the pros and cons of these different types of approaches, and I will get right into it. Again, my name is Charlie Harris, and I have a background in governmental accounting. I worked for the state of Missouri for quite a few years in Office of Administration, and then later at the Department of Transportation, which at the time was called the Highway and Transportation Department. I worked in various accounting and auditing roles, so I was involved in the CAFR there and other financial reporting. We did a lot of very regular reporting to the legislature, to federal agencies. We did receive, federal funding for highways and that sort of thing. So I was very steeped in that. Spent a lot of time in that world, and then ended up going to a university for a couple years. I wanted to get a graduate degree, and just coincidentally found a job at a university where they paid free tuition for their employees. So I did that for a couple of years, and then got into the software business. Once in the software business, I spent a lot of my time in state and local market, then went to a different company and was focused on the federal market for quite a while. So I do have quite a background in this. And I went to a small company called Clarity Systems, which came out with a XBRL and financial reporting tool right around the start of the mandate in the U.S. So we were involved with a lot of the large accelerated filers and went through that whole process. That company was acquired by IBM, so I went along with the company, and we're now part of Certant. So it's that same lineage, and a lot of the same people have carried over from those days. Certain's been around since 2002. It's a profitable company. We've been profitable every quarter since we've been in business. The company basically has two focuses. One is equity management, the other is disclosure management. We have a large number of customers using us for CAFR, not for the XBRL, obviously, but for the reporting process. State of New Jersey has been using it since I think 2009 when we did that deal, and state of Louisiana and several small cities and counties are using it for CAFRs. And then we have XBRL clients who, in the US as well as around the world, so we've been involved not just in the SEC mandate. We have a lot of foreign 20F filers. We also have been involved very heavily involved in solvency, Basel, a lot of the European mandates, the Australian mandates, South Africa, Israel, several other places. So we've got about 780 customers around the world doing this. So that's us, and if you want to know more about that later, I'll be happy to answer. Approaches to managing XBRL, and this is coming from a lot of this is from the experience of the private sector XBRL mandate that came out in the U.S. filing to the Securities and Exchange Commission. So three major ways of doing this, and I think some of you other folks who have been involved in this, you probably saw this if you were around at that time, that the initial approach that a lot of these companies took was to outsource. Basically, they said, you know what? We're just going to pay somebody else to do our XBRL for us. Now, at some point, state of Florida is going to say, okay, this is our process, here's the taxonomy. Now, all of you entities, you need to report this to us somehow. And so there are going to be different ways for them to do it. So what we initially found is that many organizations wanted to outsource. They basically got one of the financial printers, which were like companies like R.R. Donnelley, Bound at the time, which was later acquired by Donnelley Merrill, which is going through an acquisition right now, I believe. And these printers, they were one of the major ones because they were involved in the financial printing of these. And so what they did then is they decided they were going to outsource. Some of the accounting firms and also did this. There were some problems with this, which we'll talk about in a minute. Standalone bolt-on is basically a tool, some sort of software tool that's either online or on-prem, regardless, where you're taking your numbers out of your reports and you plug your numbers into this tool, and then that tool does the tagging and actually makes those XBRL tags on those numbers. So this covers a product that maybe the filer would buy or license either online on the cloud or on-prem. This also covers what we saw in Europe a lot in a lot of these mandates where the regulatory body actually created an application online where the filers would then go to that application and put their numbers in. Okay, so that's a bolt-on solution, what we call a bolt-on. And then there's the integrated solution, which is a solution that actually is part of building the report, and then the tagging is applied to that report as it's being built internally. So that's what our solution is. That's what Workiva is. That's what a few of these others are what we call an integrated solution. So these are kind of the three main ways to approach this. So outsourcing. The issue that we found there initially when when organizations wanted to do this, their initial thought was, we don't want to know about XBRL. This is just, it's a mandate. It's something we have to do. We don't like it. We're not interested in it. We're just going to pay somebody else to do it and just make this thing go away, which is what they did. So then they got through the process, took their report, threw their report over the fence to this outsourcer. The outsourcer then sent it back and said, okay, it's all tagged. We're ready for you to sign off. Did we do it right? And then they suddenly realized we do have to understand something about XBRL. We cannot be completely ignorant of what XBRL is. We have to understand to some degree to know if these things are being tagged the right way. So that was a problem. The other problem was that this process couldn't be done until they were near the end of their report. They had the report finalized. They would throw it over the fence, and it would go for a week, 2 weeks, however long it took for that to be tagged. Come back, and it's 2 days before filing. Someone says, "Whoops, we have to change a number. There has to be an adjustment." And we had major corporations that I worked with that had a problem because they were late filing because they couldn't get those changes done. So those are the problems that we have with that. Standalone, somewhat similar problem in that there's a duplication of work because we have this report that's completely created, and then we have to take these numbers out of these reports and stick them into this other tool. It still requires the knowledge of XBRL for you to tag these appropriately. However, now you're taking it and you're duplicating this effort of putting it in another tool. With the integrated approach, you're actually doing the tagging within the approach, within the actual tool where you're building the report. So you have these tags set up on these different values, so you have your report the way you want the report to look, and then you're actually pointing to those values as they appear in their report and applying the tags there, which then mean as the values change, the new values update, but you don't have to go through the retagging process. So these are kind of the main differences in these. Any questions on this? On these? Okay. So what typically happens before XBRL is in the process is this is what happens. There's the consolidation, which is a huge piece. I know when we worked at the state of Missouri, this was a very big piece because we had different general ledger systems for Department of Corrections, for Department of Environment. All these different organizations had different GLs. So that was a big piece. Then there was the whole report preparation of putting this in, doing the interagency eliminations, doing the interfund transfers, all this sort of thing, and then we would publish it. Now what happens if we do just the outsourcing of XBRL, or if we do the bolt-on, what we're doing now is we're adding XBRL to the end of this process. And this creates a problem because now what we're doing is we're just creating a huge burden for those filers. And that creates a big problem. So tagging this on the end of the process makes it, creates big problems. So one of the reasons that we think the integrated approach is better is because what we're doing is we're actually taking this report prep process and simplifying it and streamlining that. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, how that streamlines that process. So actually just creating the published report in a PDF without XBRL is faster by doing this. So you increase that speed, and that leaves you time. Then the XBRL piece is faster also, which then compresses the time that it takes to create this. So this puts us in the situation where what we've done now is we've added this additional requirement of XBRL, but the entire process is simplified for the filer. So a couple things that this does here. Number one, by doing it this way, the filers do not need to change their report because these folks have worked many years getting this CAFR to look the way they want it, to represent the data the way they want it represented. And now what you're saying is you don't have to change that. Keep it looking exactly the way it is. Keep displaying the data the way you want to display it because you've worked for a lot of years getting this and refining it to look this way. All we're doing now is we're saying we're giving you a tool that you can continue to create this, continue to have it look the way you want it to look, but we're going to streamline it and make it faster for you. And now what we're going to be able to do is add that tagging into that actual developed tool. So this is why we think this is the preferred way to do it. Now, when we talk about narrative reporting, again, this is something where we talked about, the descriptions. So this is where we have to deal with these numbers. And so these numbers that have to be updated. And what we want to do is apply the tags right to where these numbers are. This is a half a page from a typical annual report, and when a number changes and there's an adjusted entry, Most of you, if you've ever done this, you deal with this. These are the numbers that have to go back and be manually updated. So this is part of that idea of automating this piece so that it compresses, so that these numbers are tied back to the actual source systems. These numbers are actually pointing to that SAP data or that Oracle data or the AMS data or the Microsoft Dynamics data, whatever that source data is, and these are updated. And then what we find out is that this data exists in a variety of different reports and reporting packages. So we have things that are going to the departmental directors, we have reports that are going to the legislators, we have reports that are part of the budget book. And there's a lot of this same data is in these multiple reports. So instead of pulling that data out and recreating it in some kind of data warehouse, the data just sits where it is and we point to it and pull that data in. And the data automatically updates in all of these reports to include the XBRL. So now what we're doing is we're giving these filers a whole lot of different time. When we set this up at a lot of companies, what they did, they really were mostly interested in the efficiency of the reporting, and then they used the XBRL more or less as the justification. They said, hey, there's this mandate, we have to meet this thing, and they used that, and then they were able to come in and streamline their reporting processes. Because when you go and look at this, and you've seen this if you've done these reports where you have this source data and the way it's typically done, is this data is pulled into spreadsheets, it's manipulated, emailed back and forth, and this is very inefficient, right? We've seen this throughout organizations. I did this. Most people have done this at one point or another. And then it goes email to the next person, then what do? They keep a copy. They keep a copy of it, and then now you have multiple copies, and then you have to produce this, then you have to do the tagging out for the XBRL. So what we're doing is really streamlining this process, then adding the tagging into it. So I'll just go through this. So basically we're putting everything into a central location. The key here is that we're connected to that source data. We're not duplicating any data here. And so as that source data updates, it flows through all of the reports so that now we have a complete control. And I will, I'll skip through some of the screenshots. One of the keys that's very clear about, that's very key about this is that we're utilizing, Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, and that the reports look the way that they typically do. We have a complete workflow process to manage the approval routing. We can look at any section of the report, see who's done what, where they're at in creating these reports. Complete audit trail, complete validation. This validation, by the way, since we connect back to the source data, it's not just validating numbers in that table, it's validating that a number in that report actually ties to the number in that source system in SAP or Dynamics or wherever it is. So it actually is tying back to your actual book of record. And then, of course, automatically updating everything. And the key here is that you have the report the way the filer wants the report to look, and then the tagging's done right in that report. It's not being tagged at a database level or some other level. I know we had a couple of other vendors. Does anyone here work from SAP or Oracle? So they made an attempt to do this, to do all of the XBRL tagging at the database level, because they didn't have an understanding that those numbers get adjusted before they go into the report. And so it was a huge failure because they didn't quite understand where that should go. Okay, very good. So that was a very brief explanation of kind of our approach and what we've seen in the XBRL market and how this is rolled out and some of the different ways that your filers will be able to approach dealing with this and dealing with the mandates. So hopefully that was helpful, and feel free to contact me for any additional information. And that's all I've got. Thanks.
Okay. Another Indian face thrown in, but with a different accent. Well, I've lived across Hong Kong, Vietnam, India, of course, and Singapore. So I might drop in a few words like la. And if you hear that, don't get worried. It doesn't mean anything. It's just an additional word which just throws in an accentuation to the last word that you've spoken. So to start with, just to give an introduction, I'm Anand Padmanabhan. Forget about the last name. Anand should do. And I represent IRIS. IRIS is a 16-year-old company. We've been with XBRL right from day one. In fact, we have been working with Edgar Online in those days, where we did the pilot project of converting HTML into XBRL with the first pilot taxonomy. So we converted about 20,000 companies at that time, 20,000 documents. And that has been our pedigree. And since then, we started off as a conversion company, looking at offering services based out of India to tag data which was sent across from the US and several other markets, in the UK as well. So we are a full range XBRL company. What does that mean? I'll come to another slide. and talk about it. We have built platforms for collection of data. Typically, for a regulator, for the state, when you need to collect XBRL data, you need to have a platform to receive, validate, render, and then push it into a database, and then have a dissemination process. So we have built platforms for 16 odd regulators across 22 countries. I've literally gone and sold. I've been an evangelist in XBRL, selling in countries, literally sitting on a camel, and I've gone sold XBRL in Saudi Arabia, in a bullock cart in India, and in a boat. Yes, that was true in Bangkok. So we have gone ahead and demonstrated XBRL and the value of XBRL in places where we don't even know the local language. So Thailand, for example. So I had an interpreter. I don't know what he said, but eventually we did manage to convince the regulators there to use XBRL. So we have been pushing the concept of the use of XBRL in a very big way. So right far into a tiny island in Mauritius, Singapore, across several other countries in around the Indian Ocean primarily. But we have been working in UK, Ireland, in Russia, in Australia, where we have been offering solutions for the reporting entities primarily for the submission of XBRL or iXBRL data. And in fact, we've been working with regulators, as I said, globally. We have just completed a pilot with ESMA on the generation of an iXBRL document for several European companies, starting with different languages, and still be able to tag and generate and submit it to a regulator and validate it. So we've been involved with XBRL International for a long time. We've been active in the working groups. So since we built the collecting platform, we also end up developing the taxonomy. So we have a strong taxonomy development team to be able to leverage the experience of building taxonomy for different countries, different requirements. Yossi also mentioned that how you use the data is important when you design your taxonomy. So there are different approaches, like you've probably heard of the DPM approach, which has been actively propagated in Europe, primarily for prudential reporting, but that is now being slowly used for other forms of reporting as well. So in 22 countries, over 4 continents, we are about 300 strong, member in XBRL International, Europe, India as well. So that's roughly our footprints. You see in all these countries, we have gone about working with the regulator and also providing solutions for reporting entities to submit the data in XBRL. So you talked about bolt-on solutions. That's how we started. We started the convergence service, built our own solution, went on to build a bolt-on solution typically, which would integrate or independently work as a piece, as a software to generate XBRL or iXBRL, and then went on to build an integrated platform as well. And given that we have experience of working with different kinds of taxonomies, different kind of reporting requirements, we have an incredible depth of experience as to see how data can be used. And now we have gone into exploring, pushing XBRL and the data that we have collected to normalize. You talked about normalization with the US data. We are doing across different jurisdictions. So we built a backbone of a taxonomy based on IFRS, which we map any taxonomy to that core backbone of a taxonomy and automate the entire process of normalization, which means a company reporting in China can be easily compared with what is being reported in Saudi Arabia, though they are reporting in 2 different languages, because in all these countries you have dual language labels allowing you to be able to interpret the same label in different languages. So that normalization process is still in a beta version, but we have a platform which can actually normalize across different jurisdictions. So primarily, as I said, we build software. We have solutions across 3 pillars that we call in our organization. We are in the create, that we build tools and applications for the creation of XBRL or iXBRL data. Then we also have a platform to collect, validate, store, and disseminate the data. And third, of course, for the consumption, which is still evolving at the moment. We don't have a finished product at the moment. So these are different names of products. I'll skip this slide. because I've got 32 slides. Mark, you will open your shoe and throw at me. So I shall not go into all the slides. But I will primarily talk about two products that we have. One is what we call iFile, which is primarily for a regulator to collect the data. So typically in the state of Florida, you could have the CFO's office collecting all the IXBRL documents being generated by various agencies to validate it against certain rules which are applicable specifically for Florida. Yossi, you also mentioned that validation requirements differ from regulator to regulator. So Florida could have something which is absolutely local and to their requirement. So we build in, so that validation needs to be done. Once you receive and you said, yes, it meets our local standards, then you make that data available to the public at large. You don't want that data to be out there which does not truly represent the legislation in the state. So not only we have XBRL data, validations which are built into the taxonomy, but also business rules which can be built into the platform and shared with the creating tools as well. Somebody talked about that as well, where you can disseminate those validation rules for software vendors to consume into their platform and make it available when they submit the data, it is already validated. So our basic platform addresses the collection process. We also have a built-in workflow engine. So once you collect it in your portal, it's an online portal, you could submit it through an API. It could be a machine-to-machine transfer, or it's an upload of a file that you have generated and the agency has generated. Now this platform, once you receive the data and validate it, if there are errors, it immediately spits out those errors and tells you what corrections have to be done. Emails are triggered out to various respondents, not only within the regulator, but also to the reporting entities. So as a result, everybody is aware instantly that a document has been filed with the relevant validations going through. And if not, what are the reasons why it was rejected? Then internally within the organization, that document could be routed to different groups who need to see the data and review and say, yes, this is as per what we need, or for consumption purposes. So we could split the document into multiple sections and pass it on to relevant teams within the organization. At the same time, bring it back together and as a single piece to make it available and disseminate the data to other consumers within and outside the regulator's office. So not only that, we also have a rendering engine which also displays it on your screen to make it, of course, iXBRL is human readable, but XBRL is not. So the rendering engine handles the specific requirements of rendering the XBRL or iXBRL data, but at the same time making it convertible to any other format, CSV, JSON, or PDFs or whatever, so that it's available in different formats to the public at large. Now with this tool, we also, I'm going to skip this slide, I'll be talking about the same. We have a free iFile client tool. Now, Jignesh, Microvista talked about a similar tool. The reason XBRL was successful in countries like Thailand was that we gave a free Excel-based tool, and it has some amount of automation. So it does some auto tagging, some drag and drop features, making it a lot more easier to be able to generate the XBRL or iXBRL document. And we have got about 3 million installations across 18 countries. And for each country, it is customized, and it is ready for multiple languages. So you could do Spanish and English at the same time and make the data available in 2 languages with single submission. So I think I will, given that I'm running short of time, I'll jump into the tool. The reason why I'm using my laptop is that the tool is a little sensitive. Seems to fall apart when it's not properly tested and made available. But we have been working with Mark in making this ready for St. Petersburg. We have built the taxonomy, taking a different approach, the DPM approach. We have just made it available in GitHub today. We went through a process of becoming members of XBRL US, though, and then signing off the IP policy. That took some time. So our taxonomy built by Iris is also available, which is taking a different DPM approach to development. So let me get to the tool. So typically, when you create a filing, you start off, you could have multiple taxonomies applicable at a given period of time. For a particular, that each year you could have a taxonomy applicable. So depending upon you are doing a quarterly reporting or an annual reporting, or if it's budgeted, or for a specific time period, the taxonomy could change. And the system, this we call scoping questions. We go through this process to identify what is the right taxonomy you should be using for this particular reporting time period. So somebody used St. Pete, so I'm going to call it St. Pete's. So some number here. So obviously you can choose the currency. Of course, here it is in the single currency. Again, you could either say that you want to report in dollars, thousands of dollars, or millions, whatever works. Okay. You could have annual or quarterly or whatever that's needed. You define the time period for which you're reporting. So I'm going to take Jan 1st, 2017 to 31st December. I'm a little rusty on this. And whether you want it audited, unaudited, or whatever. So we'll go with that. Based on this, it automatically, Based on the inputs, it chooses the taxonomy and is now in the process of generating a template. So reporting templates which are needed for this particular reporting. I'm just going to go into some of the basic features. So one option is, of course, to key in the data into the templates. And the other option is, of course, load and upload a source document. It could be a Word document or an Excel sheet. Okay, so basically this is what is called the scoping questions, the scoping questions, and the what I entered it in the first phase. And the contents, I've only used 5 of the statements, but typically this will have n number of statements. We have up to 24, 25 statements for which taxonomy is built. You go into it and pick up your source document. So you have your source document here, which is a Word document. So typically you would go to the section that you want to tag. And I say, I will just tag these first three lines, or probably the entire statement, but for time, I will just take that much, and I say auto tag. So what the system does, it picks up and compares the labels, and it automatically tags. Now, ones which I've tagged are in green. The ones which are not tagged are in orange. So what I could do further is I could choose the elements, and I say cash and cash equivalents. If you notice, in this statement, this cash in the second word is small c, whereas in the statement is capital C. But this rule, we have a rules repository. Now you can go ahead and make those changes. That is number one. The second option is once I drag and drop, the system learns that this label, which is there in the original source document, and the one on this is the same. So what happens here is, so on the left, it tells me what is the item that I've collected from the source document and what I have mapped to this. So now the system has learned that this is the drag and drop, this is the tagging which needs to be done. And next year onwards, your auto tagging gets automatically mapped. So you just have to select and say auto tag, and the system completely drags and drops. And finally, you just click generate XBRL, validate it, and out comes your XBRL output. So this is a simple tool. This is given free of cost once you take the platform, the collection platform. Okay, with that, I think I shall
call it a day.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for being here. Thanks to the host city, St. Pete. Nice to be back, and thank you for hosting the demo day. My name is Dean Ritz. I'm Senior Director for Digital Reporting at Workiva. Workiva is the #1 provider of XBRL data points to the SEC, primarily from the public company reporting space. What I thought I would do today is address something which we haven't spoken so much about. I think anyone who's looking at this video, and we all know, there's plenty of vendors who provide solutions for providing XBRL data. There are multiple vendors for providing platforms for receiving XBRL data. There are also a growing number of companies that want to do analysis and apply their algorithms to the machine-readable data, to the open data. I thought I would take a moment to talk about something a little different, which is the importance of the data models, and I guess a little shout out to the working group. The success of the disclosure modernization is less contingent on the technology that's available, because we have many providers for it, but rather on the quality of the data model that we're using and the quality of its representation. And there is a lot to understand and learn from the US GAAP experience as well as from IFRS. So my experience is primarily with US GAAP. I think if one is trying to create a successful disclosure modernization effort here in Florida, the focus would be on the quality of the data model. And it's clear that the approach that we need to take is one which accounts for the interests of data consumers as well as data providers, and in particular would provide for representing the complexity of what the data describes in a CAFR without burdening unnecessarily the provider of the data. And that was a big challenge over in the SEC space, that in the data model that they created, the data model prioritized, we'll say, the presentation of the data, how it appeared on the page, rather than the representation of the data, which is to say what it means regardless of where you put it in the document. So in terms of the modernization here in Florida, I would just like to emphasize the importance that the attention of the data model does require in order for the disclosure modernization effort to be successful. So I'll give a little bit about my background, why I'm saying these things. I've been in XBRL only 13 years, so there are a couple older timers here, like Yossi, that have been here for a while. I want to shout out to Joe from Thales. I too have a master's degree in analytic philosophy, which I think is a real plus, because you are dealing with how do you represent things. And it's one thing to say I have a line item that represents a particular business activity and the amount of funds that were applied, but again, for a data consumer, they're going to want to be able to pull that data apart, and they don't look at it monolithically. And again, in analytic philosophy, especially if you're dealing with how do we know things, how do we represent things, the ability to pull the information apart is critical. And the ability for that data to be useful for municipal analysts, for the state providing oversight, for peer municipalities to understand how their other peer communities are reporting their financials. Again, the data model is the key element for success. So I just keep on coming back to that point. And I think I'll speak for all vendors when I say a really terrible taxonomy is an awful thing to have to work with. And that the success, the happiness of the vendors as well as the data providers as well as the data consumers, again, is contingent on that lingua franca, that common representation that must bridge the differences between the complexity and the complexity of the data consumers' needs with the simplicity of the data providers' wishes. So what I thought I'd do here for Workiva is just show one aspect. Another of our presenters discussed the integrated approach, which is what Workiva provides with this WDust product. What I thought I'd focus on is just like, how do we look at and see the relationship between the data that's being reported and the XBRL or open data representation of it, because that's critical. Workiva took the integrated approach, and the integrated approach made sense to us, and for primarily the reasons that were already mentioned, which is you often change data later down the line, and to have to go back and separate the representation from the XBRL representation is too burdensome. So what I have here, we're looking at the WDusk environment, which is a cloud-based collaborative open data reporting platform. We'll see on the left-hand side an outline that represents a document, and in this case, we'll see on the right-hand side simultaneously the representation of the XBRL data model that is used to describe the statement of net position. What one is expecting, if you were a provider of data, is the ability to have a document editor being able to work in something that's familiar, share documents, share sections, control who has access to a document at any one time, so that you can collaborate around the content, be able to have workbooks, be able to link data between the workbooks, be able to have a presentation and link data from the presentation back to the workbook. I mean, having a collaborative document production environment is just what everyone should be expecting. It's what a number of us have been providing for a while. The standard for Florida, and what's important to recognize here, is the importance of having an integrated approach for representing the XBRL. So if I were taking a look at the XBRL component here, what I can see in my document is something that looks familiar, certainly should look familiar to the folks here from St. Petersburg, Florida, these numbers. But what I'd like to show is the overlay of how the XBRL is actually behind all these things. So for example, I'll show behind the scenes that all these data, all these numbers are actually facts that aggregate important properties that give the fact, that give that number meaning, give it context, so that you can trust the data, which is sort of the key value behind disclosure modernization, to eliminate the ambiguity, and therefore increase the trust and confidence that one has in the data. So what XBRL really provides for the state and for those working in XBRL is the ability to eliminate ambiguity. So I can see that numbers here are all tagged in US dollars. I can further, if I were inspecting this will be kind of wonky. I'm not a sales guy, so I like doing the wonky things. If I were to highlight a series of facts, and if you have good eyes and are under the age of 30, this is the problem with having young software engineers, you will see that what I'm actually looking at right now is the XBRL tagging that describes the underlying data that I've highlighted. Now let me turn off this feature here. And what I can see is that some of this data relates to governmental activities as described by the XBRL tagging. Other data represents the business type activities, and the other data represents a total for government type activities. I can also see that one is about assets that are cash and cash equivalents, goes across the three different representations of activity. One represents investments, and the last is the uncollectibles. Again, in the disclosure modernization, the importance of the data model and the taxonomy that implements the data model is to permit you to get the point of view, extract the data from the point of view that's important to you when you're providing oversight or doing analysis. So being able to see in one place the relationship between the visual document, how it's laid out, and the underlying data model representation of it in XBRL is it's critical to see those together. One thing that also XBRL provides in the relationships that you're able to define is how numbers roll up. Now we're all busy doing footing, or we've all had that amount of suffering. I can see in my example here, there's actually, if I make this even bigger for those of us who don't have perfect eyesight, I can see that the numbers here, I can ask Anne or Erica, I think these are the numbers, and they really do foot in the real world, right? But what I have in XBRL, it's also doing an additional level of validation in real time, saying, you've reported $899 million. However, XBRL is calculating that what you're reporting is $644 million. So XBRL can represent some of the validation or some of the information you would then use to test data integrity. And for me, in this example, it's pretty, I inserted an error. And one of the things we would do is just take a quick look around, and I'm sure you don't report some of your numbers in euro. Okay, so what we would do is essentially, again, edit the XBRL component of it and say this number is no longer in euro, it actually needs to be represented in US dollars. And so by making that change and applying that change, there's an OK button somewhere. Now let's save it out. If I go back down to my total now, I can see that I have a green underline. So again, what I'm trying to emphasize here is that having a data model, data description, offers additional opportunities to promote data integrity. Again, for the benefit of oversight, benefit of data consumers, it's the ability to trust the data that you receive and understand what it means without ambiguity. So, as you can tell, I probably had a prior life as a pastor or evangelist. I'm a big believer in what the XBRL provides for us. So, other things that I'd like to show here is, for example, other ways of looking at the data. This is a viewer that we have, which allows us to look at the data and essentially see the XBRL in the kind of detail that might look a little gruesome now, but if you're doing it, will be useful. Being able to stack the numbers, stack the fact details about the numbers projected through the familiar layout of the program. Again, separating representation, what your eyeballs want to see on the page, the presentation, what your eyeballs want to see, from the representation, what the underlying data means. If we were to take a look at the same filing from the point of view of iXBRL, and this was generated from Wdesk, being able to, there are some numbers, being able to just see the value and dig into it. Right. This is some of what Yosi's speaking of, is that this is an opportunity to not just think about getting the data out, but to revisit the process whereby disclosure happens. And that's why, for some of the states, we recommend in general that if the CAFR can be provided as XBRL, as open data, then the need for the AFR could be eliminated. As an example of something we're discussing at the working group. So there's a million features to show, and I won't go into the million features because, again, Wdesk is just one of the options that a data provider would have available to them. And I think, again, the consideration is we should be pleased that there are so many vendors who offer a variety of solutions to the providers and to the data consumers. And to those who are providing oversight, like the state of Florida, again, the emphasis I'd like to reiterate is essentially the duty to make sure that the data model, the taxonomy that's created, is one which will satisfy all the constituents. And that's also the reason why Workiva is so pleased with Shannon, Professor Shannon Soul and Mark Joffe's work chairing and vice chairing the XBRL US Working Group for state and local government reporting. So I will end with that appreciation. Thank you very much.
So I wanted to thank everybody for participating today. Just to draw a few common threads through everything that we've seen. XBRL is quite a mature technology. It's been around since the late 1990s. You can see that there's a large infrastructure of software companies that have thought about XBRL, how to implement it in various ways, and how to adopt it to the needs of particular filing communities. So I believe, and I think the vendors here would agree with me today, that this is a very well-developed solution that's ready to go for Florida once there's a good taxonomy in place. And what I would urge anyone viewing this from the state CFO's office or in other states or at the federal level where you might be thinking about doing an implementation like this is let's build standards together. Let's think about exactly what all the elements should be in a taxonomy, how those elements should relate to one another, how they should be reported. But then let's unleash the power of XBRL and use it so that the filing community, the recipients of the information, and those further downstream can all benefit from a single standard that's been well thought out and well articulated.